All right, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the LinkedIn podcast, your place for the Philadelphia Eagles on the Sideline Sports Network. I'm your host, James Tatum. I'm with Lindy, who is ready to talk about the debacle of a season that the Eagles just had. It was a season to forget. We have to go over a lot of things today and what the team's going to do moving forward. Lindy, how you doing today, man? How are you?
Are we actually ready? are
I'm
are we?
ready.
Are we? Because
I'm
I
ready.
mean,
I'm ready to move on. This season is what it was. I wasn't really based on the way that things went down the stretch. I really I'm not gonna say I was hoping that the team would lose, but I am a little bit relieved that it's over and don't have to talk about this nonsense anymore. So we'll just get into it, man. The wild card round. This was a pathetic performance, another one by the Eagles. And was it surprising, though? I don't think so. I don't think it was surprising. I think that, I kept saying if this team had any ounce of heart or pride left, then they would go out and they would kick this team's ass because the Eagles are a better team than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This team is not 32-9 better than us. Definitely not. We already beat this team in regular season. We have better players. So it was just really sad to see that the same crap that had been plaguing the Eagles was still plaguing them. Like, how are you a professional team with this offensive line and these players, but you don't know how to stop a blitz? They did was blitz the whole game. You don't throw any passes you threw three passes to Devontae Smith in the middle of the field, and they all went for huge gains. You only went to those plays three times in the whole game. You kept trying to throw the ball outside the numbers. You kept trying to throw the ball, you know, throw screens and these short little dump off passes. You give the ball to freaking Kenneth Gainwell, and he tries to reverse, takes a huge loss. And then Jalen Hurts takes the safety, and stuff like that. Pretty much just sums up this whole season. Um, this offensive scheme is very bad, and I don't really see. I don't really think that a coordinator change is going to change the entire offensive scheme. So that really makes me wonder, like, is Nick Sirianni, is he really the guy that you want leading this team going forward? Because if you bring in a guy, a seasoned coordinator, and he has to still make his scheme work within Nick's scheme, I think it's just going to create more problems. But yeah, very disappointing team. This team had high expectations to make it back to the Super Bowl. It wasn't even close. And it was a rough year. So they got a lot of work to do going forward, but they will definitely have time to figure out what they're going to do during the offseason.
we can we can only hope that they have enough time to do that. And it's we're talking about this team like it's back in 2020. The absolute mess that was, and ended up being the demise of Doug Peterson. And there's just too much negativity between that season and this season here that mirrors eerily similar. And it's just weird from where this team started and how it ended. um, we can now we should have said a long time ago that the wool was being put in front of our eyes. And it just dates me back to, I forget how many episodes ago it was. It had to have been in the 40s. um, the Bills overtime victory, and titling the thumbnail like, Jalen Hurts, what do you want me to say? And well, obviously we want you to say quite a lot, with you being a part of what has happened outside of what the head coach didn't do, outside of what you didn't do as a quarterback, what the general manager didn't do to try and create any kind of sustainability on this football team. And what the owner hasn't done in creating a creating a consistent product on the field of how you want your football team to be advertised. Dating back to the Super Bowl year, and it's and it's just such a weird revolving door of just the same type of collapse or demise, however you want to put it. They win the Super Bowl in 17. 18, they come this close to getting back to the NFC Championship game. By all accounts, it was a different scenario. 19, the team starts to deteriorate a little more. There's too many old players, and Carson's having to make magic with mincemeat, and he throws for 4,000 without a receiver hitting at least 500 or over. The tight end had the most yardage. We can go through that as many times as we want. We understand it at this point, but it's you you go from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia. It's already been talked about in the media and by players, and we heard about Slay just completely roasting it to the point where it's like being married to two different, it's like two different marriages. One person wants one thing, one person wants the other. It's for players to come out and talk like that is is awfully embarrassing, to say the least. When you are operating and managing and putting together this professional product that millions upon millions of people watch, and you know instilling a group as large as our fan base is to spend for people to spend hard-earned money to go to these games, and this is the product that you give us. it's I can go on and on how just completely wrong this is, but you can narrow it down to one thing, and it still remains true to this day, because you can go back to like all the Hard Knock stuff too. How comedically inappropriate, or whatever other adjective you want, this team to this day can still not handle success. They cannot. And it doesn't matter the type of regime, between coaches, players, what have you. It's a culture problem. And until pieces of that culture change, we're not going to be able to understand how to sustain any type of level of success to carry forward positively into the next season. And that's why we're in this position.
All right, so the question now is, after the result of this season, should Nick Sirianni be fired?
I honestly don't think he's going to be.
But
This is
should the question is not do you think he is? The question
should
is
he?
should he?
I,
Does he deserve to be?
oh man, I've been bouncing with this back and forth, and it can be easy to say, and it can be easy, and it can't be easy at the same time, because and I'll go back to this: the exit interview or exit press conference that Jeffrey Lurie had, I think it was 2020, after after Doug goes out the door, and um, with the drafting of Jalen Hurts and everything, and the demise of Carson Wentz and what have you, and all that sort of thing. It still sticks in my craw to this day on how Jeffrey Lurie described the type of football team that he wanted. And, he talks about wanting to produce a product on the field that, is capable of making explosive plays and and like deep passes and, all this kind of stuff downfield and, and being explosive and going for the explosive play. Well, it still stands true to this day in really a negative manner. And you can argue that it worked last year, but I think the circumstances were a little bit different when you start from 2021 and Jalen is in his first year, in his first official year starting, and you had the combination of Sirianni and Shane Steichen getting a full year together to try and figure this out and the offense and what have you. But that's not the here nor there. What I'm getting at in terms of the termination is the fact that it's really looking like it's going to play out the way it did with Doug Peterson. He was given a chance to come up with a game plan, and it was about who he wanted in his staff and who he wanted to elevate, who he wanted to hire, this, what have you. And when, Jeffrey did not like the vision because Doug wanted his guys, as we know, and yes, there was plenty of Eagles fans that clowned him for it, especially after that season and especially after a few other seasons and him wanting Press Taylor as his offensive coordinator. And then I think it was another change that everyone was, and I remember it vividly. Everyone was like, "Are you nuts? Absolutely not." And we're thinking like, what has Press Taylor done to even validate him as the offensive coordinator? And we're saying all this stuff, and we're like, okay, well, Doug was great for the time that he was here, but it's just when you make a decision like that, or when you make a request like that, you know, you're not prolonging your tenure that way. And that's what's ultimately going to happen with Sirianni now. He and Howie Roseman are in the middle of searching for coordinator candidates, as it's been described in the media and reported and what have you. Um, but I think it's a little bit different this time. I think Howie has had a lot more involvement in this, and people want to talk about secluding Nick from this whole thing and putting it all on him. Let me remind you, going back to the beginning of this season and then a little bit from last year, count the amount of times in your head that Sirianni and Howie Roseman have been in press conferences together, and they're talking all buddy buddy, and they seem to have this nice cohesion, that they're on the same page and this and that and whatnot. Well, okay. Well, if you're going to pin this all on the head coach, for how much of a collaboration that was portrayed between the head coach and the general manager, how much of this responsibility is on the general manager at the same time, if depending on the amount of say that he has had in the staff that was given to Sirianni this year, after who left the building between Steichen and Jonathan Gannon? Was this solely what Sirianni wanted in terms of the promotions, like Brian Johnson as offensive coordinator instead of the quarterbacks coach, and bringing in Sean Desai and all this sort of thing? Was it solely on the head coach or not? We don't have a concrete clue or idea. So I it's been too much of a back and forth decision for me personally to think of whether or not he should be terminated. Me personally, no, I do not think so, for two reasons. Number one, Number one is because of the fact that this has been the recent MO for the Eagles, is that it's been in their history to where they want to make that genius ahead of the curve type of move. A little bit on what the Rams did with Sean McVay, maybe getting this young mind in the to where they think they're going to strike gold, and there's going to be a lot of positive change, and they're just going to be ahead of the curve of it. And if you fire him after the amount of success in only 3 years that he has produced, well, what does that tell other potential candidates, if you have any at that point? What does that tell them? Oh, well, Sirianni had a winning record percentage of almost 70% and he still got fired. Well, what makes the next candidate think that that's going to be a good destination in order to have that type of promotion, if it's a guy in Sirianni's position or not, and what have you? So that's one reason to me. One reason to me is it would not be a good look whatsoever, and it just ruins your
So
chances going forward of getting the guy that a lot of us want to help change that culture. I forget the
I
second reason because I went on a complete tangent, but personally, I do
I
not think it would be a good decision to fire him.
I hear everything you're saying, but I don't really like the direction that you're going with that take, because you can say that people are not going to want this job because, well, Nick Sirianni won a lot of games and he got fired. There's been coaches that won more games than Sirianni that got fired. There's been coaches that's been more successful than Sirianni and got fired. Doug Peterson, more successful. Andy Reid, more successful. Chip Kelly won double digit games both of his first 2 years. He had a high winning percentage, got fired. The Eagles are not an organization that's scared to move off of coaches that have won a lot of games. They've done it many times. So the fact of the matter is this: do you think that Nick Sirianni has lost the locker room? And if the answer to that question is yes, and what we saw on the field was a lot of players giving up. In that playoff game, there was minimal effort. And that's a playoff game. That's not a regular season game. That's not a preseason game. That effort that I saw was very alarming. So I really do have questions, despite what Kelsey has said, despite what Fletcher Cox has said, their strong endorsements of Sirianni. They did the same thing for Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson still got fired, and he won a Super Bowl. So you want to know something? I don't really know what's going to happen. I would say that it's probably more likely that he does come back, but the question is, does he deserve it? I think that based off what we've seen, you lose 6 of your last 7 games. Your offense is pretty much putrid, even though everyone wants to blame Brian Johnson. However, I find it very interesting that the rest of the league has a different opinion of Brian Johnson than what Eagles fans and other people have. Otherwise, why is Johnson getting interviews from 4, 5, 6 NFL teams for head coaching jobs? He wouldn't be getting interviews if they didn't have somewhat respect for him. So that's another thing that makes me concerned about Nick. So I don't care if you bring in Eric Bieniemy. I don't care if you bring in any offensive coordinator that you want to list that has a good reputation. What's going to happen if he has to come here and then Nick is like, no, this is my offense and you have to stick to plays that's within this? You're going to create the same problem that you already have. So if you really think that this guy is not the guy that can lead this team, then you need to get rid of him now. And
I don't think I
while they're
don't think
still
the
coaches, you can bring in Bill Belichick right now. Bill Belichick is still out there. You can bring in other coaches that are hot commodities. You can bring in Ben Johnson. You can bring in these guys that everyone thinks is changing the game. Or you can bring in a guy that's already won 6 championships. So, Sirianni, if you don't have faith that he's the guy, then there's no reason to keep him here. You didn't have a reason to keep Doug and he had more success. So what I don't really see what's the difference. So if that's the case, then the Eagles should get rid of him. But if it's not, then keep him for another year, bring in coordinators. But if it's the same result after next season, he's got to go.
If the offensive perspective was true, then, if there's in sounding, if there's a level of arrogance there that, it's, it has to be my offense, this, that, and the third. If that was the case, then I don't think Sirianni would have given up play calling duties in 2021 to Shane Steichen, and look how much that decision has turned everything around. So if that were the case with Sirianni needing his offense to do this, that, and whatever else, if he had that much faith that he can handle everything, he wouldn't have given up those play calling duties in the first place.
So then why is it that the Colts offense looks even different than the Eagles offense from last year? That's because Shane has his own scheme. The scheme that was being ran here was part of Shane's ideas and game planning that was a culmination of Nick's offense. Just like Brian Johnson is the same thing. So Brian Johnson has taken unnecessary heat when Nick should be the one that's getting the primary amount of the heat, but he's not. So if there's another coordinator that comes in and it's the same result, I'm not honestly going to be surprised, because I think that this is more of a Nick issue than a Brian Johnson issue or an offensive coordinator issue. So unless Nick looks at himself and is like, yeah, man, I got to be more open to listening to what these other coaches, this other input what they have to say when it comes to this game plan. Because a lot of these guys have had a lot of success in the league. So if you bring in Eric Bieniemy, a guy that's, won Super Bowls as an offensive coordinator with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and he knows a thing or two, then you got to trust that guy to do his job. But having a guy like Brian Johnson, it doesn't really seem like you trusted him to do his job. And I think that's another thing that created issues. There was reports saying that the Eagles had no idea who was calling the offense. They didn't know if it was Nick, or they didn't know if it was Brian. So that's why everything was a dysfunctional mess. That's why you had Julio Jones running to the sideline. They didn't know who was supposed to be in the game. They didn't know what was going on. That's a coaching problem. And that's like not only a problem, but that's a huge red flag. And if stuff like that continues, you're not going to win any games. You're not going to be in the playoffs. You're not going to be trying to get back to the Super Bowl. It's not going to happen unless you make the necessary changes. So that's why I think that if you don't really trust that Nick is the guy, then you have to make that decision, and you have to make it sooner rather than later. But that's all we have time for this topic. We're going to talk about Jason Kelce. Jason Kelce has, quote unquote, announced his retirement. However, that was leaked by Adam Schefter after Kelce spoke with teammates in the locker room. But it was later found out by Jason himself, or it was later announced by Jason himself, that no, he has not made a decision. Here's what Kelce had to say.
I think everybody in the football world felt this one, man. Clearly, a lot of emotion at the end of this game for you guys, but I can attest for it because I was feeling it. I know Kylie, mom, dad, everybody that was at the game was feeling it, and I know all the friends and family that I got texts from that wanted me to tell you they reached out. They were all feeling it, man, and it kind of started when you went up to Stoutland.
Stout.
Yeah, he gave him a big old hug.
I feel like Stout and I have been hugging it out at the end of every season for the past 3 years now. But, it's, guy means a lot to me, and we've been through a lot of battles together. And, there's no chance I'd be where I'm at without Jeff Stoutland. And, he's really allowed me to flourish with my strengths and to a certain extent mask my weaknesses for a long portion of my career, which has allowed me to play and execute at a high level. So and he's taught me so much about the game, so much about life. The guy's passion is unbelievable. So, whenever, I realize that, it could be potentially one of the last times I get to do that with him. I just, really want to make sure that he knows how much I appreciate him.
Yeah.
Didn't want to get emotional, but what can you do?
You can't help it, man. You can't help it, man.
All right, and that was Kelsey's reaction. So basically, you saw there that he said, even though people are leaking that he's retiring, he hasn't really fully announced it. Let's just go over some of the things that Jason has done in his career. Has had an outstanding career, to be honest with you. As you can see here, 6-time All-Pro, 7-time Pro Bowl, Super Bowl champion, 5th center in NFL history with at least 6 first-team All-Pro selections, and the most consecutive games played for the Philadelphia Eagles in franchise history. So when you look at this, guys, he has not really, there hasn't been something that he hasn't done. That's something that he hasn't accomplished. So I don't really feel like he has anything else to do. I think that he's done it. I think that he's at the age where he can retire. He still has his health. He still has his family and his wife. He's got 2 or 3 little girls that he's currently trying to raise right now. He's done it all. So I honestly don't see him coming back. And we have this conversation every year: is Kelsey going to retire? I think that he's gotta do it, especially after a season like this. You gotta think about how emotionally draining this season has been. It's been draining for the fans, but think about if you're the players and you got all these fans and people saying stuff to you about, how you guys are losers, you guys are trash, you're not doing your job, stuff like that. Having to deal with all the noise on top of, the highs and the lows of this past season. So I don't see that Kelsey is gonna come back. I think this is it. And I will say this. This is going to be a huge hole on the team. Not only because of, is Jurgens going to play center, is Dickerson going to play? Are you going to draft another offensive lineman? Who knows what's going to happen? But one thing I will say is this: not even just as a player, but what he means to the team, what he means, his leadership, what he means as a team captain, as a guy that all the young guys can look to for advice. He's been here for 13 years. It's going to be missed. Like losing him and Fletch and possibly Brandon Graham, who also said he was open to a farewell tour. Losing those 3 guys is going to leave a big impact on the team. So that means whoever we have now, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, any of these younger guys is going to have to take a step forward as a leaders, not only as players, but leadership and how you lead the team and, show guys how it is to be a Philadelphia Eagle and what the Eagles culture is supposed to be. You have a big responsibility now. So Kelsey's accomplished everything. He's done it all. I don't see a reason for him to continue. And I think that this is going to be a moment for these younger guys to say, hey, this is our team now, and we have to take control of this team and be the best leaders we can be. So that was my main takeaway about all the rumors and everything. But Lindy, what do you think?
I think there's 2 reasons at play here, or 2 elements that you can look at. Number one, your love for the sport to continue to play, that has to just about dim out, like just about completely dim out for you to consider retiring. I mean, I don't have a complete idea of whether or not that has happened to Jason yet. Just just for his drive at this point in his mid 30s to want to continue to play, because we've we have been wondering about this for the last 3 years. I think there's people talking about this after the 2020 season and how bad that was. Kelsey that year, mind you, was the only healthy offensive lineman in that rotation. I think it was 13 or 14 different combinations. Kelsey was the only healthy one. And I also believe, well, the second reason behind that to me is how much have Jason and Travis thought of playing together before this, before this even happens. And for those that haven't watched much of the brotherhood between Jason and Travis, what the little I do know, in the fact of the reason the reason Travis wears 87 is because of he and his brother's legacy. And when the legacy started for the two of them, I think in terms of either just being brothers or the journey of playing football. So between the two of them, you can already
It was the
imagine
year
how
Jason was
much.
born,
Well, yeah,
1987.
yeah. So between the two of them, and how much of a role model Jason has become for Travis, you can't tell me there hasn't been a single time where these two have not wanted to play together, especially at the NFL level. But at the same time, I don't think a single Eagles fan can imagine Jason playing for another team to this point, since he's spent his entire career here. No doubt, a no doubter for the Eagles Hall of Fame. And I don't want to say no doubter for, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, because I think pro footballs is one of the most difficult to, if not the most difficult to get into, between basketball and baseball. Seems that they put just about anybody in basketball's Hall of Fame.
Well,
So,
he's the fifth center in history that's had 6 first-team All-Pro selections, and all 4 of the others got into the Hall of Fame.
and I think with Jason coming out of college, who actually thought that he was going to be as good as he is, undersized at that position? Just there's not enough that you can say about that. Just the sheer career accomplishment that he has had to this point. I think the biggest thing going against this is, outside of talking about his new heights journey, what he has outside of football with that. He and Travis are doing a fantastic job. He also suffers from plantar fasciitis in his foot. And for those that don't know about plantar fasciitis, it's a degenerative condition in your foot of this fibrous tissue that's just in front of your heel, and it connects your heel to the rest of the bones in the rest of your bones in your feet. I mean, look at it here again. It's plantar fasciitis is an inflammation of the fibrous tissue, your plantar fascia, along the bottom of your foot that connects your heel bone to your toes. So imagine a guy at, to this point, 35, 36 years old, having to exert all of that force to pass protect against 300-pound men on a consistent basis in the NFL season. Just with this type of condition, it almost sounds as bad as an Achilles tear, if not worse. I personally can't imagine that. I don't know if you can imagine that. That has to be so difficult, man. The amount of pain that he can probably suffer is probably on a scale of like 11 out of 10. To do that, to deal with that and still be all pro this year, first team all pro, unbelievable. Seriously unbelievable. Do I think he runs it back? It has been talked about before with him, and this is certainly not the way that he likes to end seasons. Absolutely not. And a lot of that has to do with your love of the game of football. I think this is going to be another 50-50 for him. If he comes back, there's certainly a spot for him. Does it stunt the growth of Cam Jurgens and other offensive linemen on this team that are, that can be candidates for the center position? Absolutely not. Same thing when you look on the defensive side of the ball with Fletcher Cox. Is that going to stunt the growth of guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter? No. But at the same time, when are you can ask yourself, when are we going to see the next injection of youth into this football team? But
Best thing for those guys would be, not to get off subject, but I think Fletch retiring or leaving would be for the best, because we need more from Jordan Davis. We need more from Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
There's a reason we took those guys where we did. So
mm-hmm.
I think coming next year, and this leads us into our overview of the team. Going into next year, we're going to need more from those guys specifically.
And these are kids that come from programs. These are kids that come from programs that are basically NFL ready. There's, I guess up front, you don't want to say that there's very little that they need to adjust to, the speed of the NFL, but a lot of it is a maturity aspect, of course. Because look at Devontae Smith and how he has been, and how quick he has been looked as a leader, and especially not just on the offense, but in that wide receiver room. Look at that Buccaneers game. One of the only ones.
Broke the record for most yards by Eagles receiver in a playoff game, previously held by Jeremy Maclin, 146, Devontae, 148.
In a game where he knew he was going to be called upon.
Julio
Jones goes out. Sure. There's no A.J. Brown. And even before A.J. Brown showed up, 2021, who was Jalen's go-to? Smitty. We knew this when he was drafted. Back
so
on.
That's a good way to lead into. We're just gonna have a little conversation.
That's a tough one.
We're gonna have a little conversation the last 10-15 minutes of the show here.
Yeah.
Overview overall of the team. Now that you brought up Smitty, AJ Brown, this is what I want to bring up.
Oh boy, here we go.
Everyone is saying that AJ Brown is pissed off and he's going to request a trade in the offseason. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's going to happen? I have to ask the question.
For what reason?
I personally don't.
Why?
But this is what the emotional takes of the fans are doing. They're like, oh, he's pissed off. He's selfish. He doesn't want to be a part of the team. He's yelling at Jalen Hurts. He's yelling at the coaches. Listen, man, these coaches have been terrible. They have not used either one of these guys the way that they should. It's been horrible, and they need to get a coordinator that's going to say, hey, I have two beasts at the receiver position. Maybe I should actually try to create unique ways to get them the ball instead of throwing them a screen pass or like a slant every single play, because that shit's not going to work.
Back to your point about the head coach. Is it now the coordinator, or is it the head coach's offense? What you were saying earlier, because
you're gonna have to figure it out.
You're claiming about, but it was your point about not so much blame deflecting Brian Johnson, but it's if Sirianni's offense is that lackluster,
whoever is organizing the offense, if it's Sirianni, I really don't know what to say to you, man. Like, you have two guys that's over 1,000 yards for the season. If you have these guys in, let's say, McVay or Shanahan or someone like that, you know what would be happening right now. You know what they would be doing to get these guys the ball. So it's not really rocket science to figure it out. So that's one of the things I'm saying about Sirianni. Like, you got to look in the mirror and say, what can I do better as a head coach? Because everyone talks about players in the offseason. Everyone, like when Jalen was coming along, they were saying, oh, this guy can't throw. He needs to work on this, this, and this. And what happened in the offseason? He worked on that, had a really good season, last season. So why is coaches not talked about like that? Why can coaches not say, I really fucked this up during this year as a coach? Okay. So how can I fix that in the next year? That's what Sirianni needs to do. He needs to be honest with himself. And if he's too arrogant to do it, then this is just going to be a giant snowball rolling down the hill next season. But if he's able to look at it and fix it and say, hey, you know what? I got guys that are great players on the team. How can I improve as a coach? How can I get these guys the ball? And all that stuff. So that's what I think about it.
We've touched upon this already in previous conversation, previous topics and everything. We got decent amount of time now, but I could also point to the question of asking yourself. We watched the combination of Sirianni and Steichen take a massive leap from the first year of them two working together, trying to figure this out to, from 21 to 22. Is it possible that Sirianni and Johnson can do that next year? I personally don't think so. I think it was too early in Johnson's tenure in the NFL because he just got here, I think, in I don't know. I think it was 20 or 20. I think it was 20 or 21. I'm pretty sure it was 21 because he came in as the quarterback's coach, and he was fine there. By all accounts, Brian Johnson was fine as the quarterback's coach. It was working out very well.
Let me explain to you what my biggest fear is of what's going to happen.
Okay. Oh boy.
Brian Johnson is going to get a job as a head coach. I don't know who's going to hire him, but he gets a job as a head coach, and he goes somewhere and he has some success. Like, even if it's like a decent level of success, maybe not even something crazy. How's that going to look on Sirianni when everyone was blaming Brian Johnson and if he was good to go somewhere? Like, for what it's worth, like, Shane Steichen has been incredible. He's been incredible as the Colts head coach. So if you have another guy that goes somewhere and he's even like decent, yet you're basically staying the same or even regressing as a coach, I think that's a major, major problem. And that does not make you look good at all. So that's what I'm afraid of. So you're going to have a lot of questions about Sirianni if Brian Johnson goes somewhere and has success and then we bring in someone and we're still struggling. That's all on Nick. If that happens, 100% on Nick.
I believe that there's too many elements to consider at the same time in regards to that, to the fact that you can also argue that being this was on Sirianni's watch the whole time, and you knew as a first-year play caller in the NFL, this guy seems to be struggling. Well, okay, where are the group conversations happening where it's the head coach, the coordinator, and the quarterback getting together and we just ask ourselves, well, why isn't any kind of collaborating conversation going on to which we're looking at answers to fix things? I think it's a combination of that. I also think it's a combination of influence in regards to the product that ownership wants to see on the field. Maybe there were possible adjustments that could have been made, but it's not necessarily what ownership likes when they see it on the field on a weekly basis. Going back to what I was talking about, what Jeffrey Lurie talks about in the type of offense that he likes to see, because it's he's the owner of the team. It's the product that he wants to advertise. So I think there's a combination of that in terms of culture. I also think it's a combination of Howie Roseman's involvement when there was speculation that he had too much of he had too much involvement in weekly game plans, who he wanted coach to play, who he didn't, because it's like picture try and come up with a reason why we barely seen, if not at all, Rashad Penny in that running back room. You pay the guy what, $3 million? What was it, $3 million, and you barely seen him? Who was ultimately making those decisions? Was it entirely the head coach? Was it entirely, the front office folks with Howie Roseman? Like how much involvement he really had for the amount of collaboration there was with the head coach and all those types of discussions? Like
It was a waste of a roster
there's
spot.
there's
Doesn't make
too
any sense.
much there's too much to speculate and consider to really put it on one person. And there's a level of insanity there that doesn't make entirely enough sense to say that this head coach has no idea what he's doing. That maybe there was a stubbornness involved there into maybe they wanted to change something and ownership did not want to make that change. Just like, for instance, was it entirely Sirianni's decision that he wanted to go from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia? Or is that what ownership wanted? As Hassan Reddick was talking about, that he kind of hinted to, there there's just too much dysfunction, and something along those lines in terms of culture and decision making, something needs to change in order for us to see any kind of positive result out of this. But yeah, I mean, going forward, here's another thing. We're talking about the coordinators and all that, and a lot of this has been offensive centric. So I know backstage you had one defensive coordinator in mind, maybe two possibly, but you did have two.
I
You
had
did
two
have two
defensive
defensive
coordinators.
coordinators in mind. So who was it that you wanted? Hopefully, going forward into 24.
He says Backyard Bird says I think that firing Sean Desai is what really messed the chemistry up of this team. I actually agree. Like
It would be.
I know
Yes.
that the defense was struggling even with Sean Desai calling the plays, but
At least in the first half.
I mean, coaches have struggles, and you know what? I don't really think that bringing Patricia. I mean, I'm not gonna say it didn't make a major difference because it did, because it made a difference for the worse. So this guy was kind of a red flag from the start, because when we first heard in the offseason they were bringing Patricia as a consultant, the only thing we thought about was how he was beefing with Slay and stuff, and how I don't know if we can really trust this guy. And he comes in and he was terrible for all intents and purposes. So, and I all the players like Blankenship said the same thing about, it was really hard to deal with two defensive coordinators and not know, like, you want us to do this and you want us to do this. Slay made the joke about like being married to two girls. You know what? It's tough, man. It was tough. So what I think they need to do is they need to clean the whole defensive staff out, and they need to just bring in a guy that has experience, that they know they can trust him, get out of his way, and let him do his thing. The two guys that I like is Mike Zimmer, who's a seasoned defensive coordinator, been coaching defense for many, many years.
Head coach
Great
as well.
defensive coordinator, has some time as a head coach. So you know that you can trust this guy to do what he has to do and just get out the way. So I like Mike Zimmer, and I also like Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera still wants to coach. He comes from a background of toughness, had a lot of success as the Carolina Panthers head coach. So this guy knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing, and he used to be on the Eagles staff as a linebackers coach. So what's the one position that the Eagles is really bad at and needs to improve? Linebacker position. So bring in some linebackers. You got a guy like Ron Rivera that knows what he's doing. I like Ron Rivera. Those are the two guys that I would try to go after. to be the Eagles' next defensive coordinator next season?
Trying to figure out whether I was trying to figure out whether or not Mike Zimmer is a Fangio disciple or not. But in talking about that, I think we've seen too much Fangio influence to this point. Jim Schwartz being one of them. Jonathan Gannon was a part of that, a part of that discipleship as well to a degree. And I only say that because, um, Gannon at one point was a part of Zimmer's staff from a defensive perspective. And it's just, when we talk about this defense, we're just tired of seeing it on, we're tired of seeing it on a weekly basis where it's bend but don't break. They don't they don't force the issue. And by forcing the issue, meaning forcing turnovers. And yeah, you want to talk about last year with the amount of interceptions the defense has had, the turnover differential they had, the amount of sacks that they had on a historic level. You want to talk about all of that. But in conjunction, when both the offense and defense are clicking at the same time, it makes it a lot easier in terms of efficiency, for one. Number two, you want to talk about those sacks. Find out the difference between how many of those sacks were pressure sacks and how many of them were coverage sacks. They go hand in hand. So is it the fact that you're putting players in a good enough position to force turnovers and succeed, instead of this year relying on aging corners to stick against younger receivers who are faster than you in man coverage? Just like the Seattle game, where you have Bradbury lined up on the on the outside, and he tries to cover Metcalf. It doesn't work, even when Sidney Brown comes over there late. Seattle does the same thing. They pick on Bradbury again, same play to the same side, different receiver. JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba gets past them, game-winning touchdown. So it's like, you play your corners in a soft serve ice cream coverage where you're afraid of them getting beat over the top, nothing cheap, nothing deep, all that sort of thing. There's no aggression anymore. It's just, I just don't think the Fangio philosophy works for this football team and what we need to instill.
I think they
We need to get away from it.
I think they should too.
Defensively on my part, in terms of research, I have not done yet, since you named off two defensive coordinators, and you had Eric Bieniemy for an OC. I have two different ones for OC. I have not done defense yet. Offensively, there's two that interest me a little bit, and it's going to depend on whether the front office, because of us trying to figure out their involvement and what have you, if they accept these kind of moves, if Howie Roseman is calling, is taking, trying to get calls with them and Sirianni and whatever. We do know that Frank Reich is involved a little bit. I heard that it was reported and along those lines, kind of acting as a consultant to Sirianni, and that's kind of obvious because we know how much of a mentor Frank Reich has been to Sirianni in his tenure in the NFL over the years. Would he be an attractive candidate for offensive coordinator? I think so, but I think people don't want to experiment with that again just because of his failures as a head coach. But I don't think you can put that against. I don't think you can put it against him because those are two
I just
completely
want to.
different
I just want to share my
positions.
thought. I just want to share my thoughts on that real quick. I'll let you keep going. But when it comes to Frank Reich, do I think he was perfect as a head coach? No, but I also think
Yes.
that I also think that he was in two situations where he pretty much got screwed. With the Colts, he was actually doing a pretty good job, and then Andrew Luck retired, and then what are you gonna do? You know, and then all this drama with the Panthers, like some of the people wanted CJ, some of the people wanted Bryce. So the
Yep.
owners overruled him and made him take Bryce. We don't know. Like, we don't know, like, with what CJ has done with
Wasn't it said that
Carolina.
Frank wanted CJ and
Yeah,
ownership
Frank.
didn't?
I'm pretty sure Frank wanted CJ, and
Oh
then,
man.
you see what happened. But I don't want to play the games with the consultants. I don't
Yeah.
want to do that. Like, they did that with Doug Peterson when they had like 5 different. They didn't have like an official OC. They just had like 5 guys that was talking to Doug. Listen, man,
Rich Scangarello
we
leading the
don't,
fold in that.
we
Oh
don't,
my goodness.
we
Yeah.
don't need that. We don't need that, and we don't want that. So, if you want Frank to be the OC, I'm got no problem with that.
Yeah, I
He's
mean,
an
I think the
experience.
same. I don't think people remember this one either. I think the same can be said for when we lost John DeFilippo as a quarterbacks coach, and I think he got elevated to
Yeah,
offensive coordinator for the Vikings, and it didn't work out very well.
Carson didn't like that guy.
He didn't, but he got the. He was one of the guys that got the absolute best out of him between
That's
him
what I'm
and
saying.
Frank.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I think there's a problem with Brian Johnson, and the problem is not really only because people want to say he stinks and he doesn't know anything about offense.
Mhm.
Even if you want to say that, that's whatever. But what I think it is that
Tough love coaching
you
is
need a
what is
coach
needed a
that's
little
going to
more
be
of.
holding Hurts accountable. And I'm
Yes.
not putting all the blame on Hurts. I think that the people that are saying Hurts is the problem of this team, you're insane if you think that. But I do think what will be helpful is a coach that'll be like, tell Jalen, like, what are you doing? Like, these turnovers and some of these plays that happen, we're like, yo, bro, this isn't what you do. We've seen you operate at a high level, not turning the ball over. You need a coach that's gonna like be like, yo, we can't have this kind of stuff out on the field. This is what we got to do, and be hard on him. Not be his friend. Not be his. They've been friends or whatever. He was coaching him and trying to recruit him, and he knows them really well. We get all that, but we need somebody that's going to be holding Hurts accountable. That's
I
what I
feel
think.
I feel it's a little scary to say at the same time though, because Carson had these same issues to a certain extent, but not entirely the same. And we're now saying this after the fact of Jalen getting that big fat contract. So do you think to a degree that the money
I
has
don't.
affected him in terms of accountability and the
No,
desire to want to win?
absolutely not. I think anybody that thinks that is insane. I think that the two situations is completely different. Carson Wentz is uncoachable. I do not think Jalen Hurts is uncoachable. I think that Jalen
Yikes.
had a down year. It is what it is. But I think that next year will be better. But for the betterment of him going forward, I don't want an offensive coordinator that's going to be his buddy. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to be good. So I think that you need to bring in somebody that's going to look at him and say, hey, you know what? He's a good player, but this is what you need to do. This is what you need to fix. This is how we need to operate offense week in and week out.
So
This is how we can be efficient and like have the difficult conversations with him. Not be his buddy. Like this game is not about being buddies with players. That's not what it is. So we need accountability in this team.
So speaking of those coordinators, the two that I have in mind, number one, who is currently working with the Miami Dolphins, and I believe he's the passing game coordinator alongside working with Tua, is Darrell Bevell. He has had quite the decorated history in this league with a little bit of time as a head coach for Jacksonville and the Detroit Lions. Notably, with Detroit, it was after the termination of Matt Patricia, coincidentally, which a lot of people should happen. A lot of people think it should happen again with the Philadelphia Eagles with how awful. Just oh my god, I can't. Just that decision was just but spent time in Minnesota, spent time in Seattle, um, spent time in Detroit when Matthew Stafford was still there. We just talked about his work with Tua. Um, so I think he has also worked with Brett Favre. I think he has worked with Russell Wilson a little bit. So he has a nice history in working with veteran quarterbacks across a across a good spectrum of skill levels, conceptually, when in terms of his offense and what have you. He did not have very good success last time he was an offensive coordinator between the Jaguars and the Lions, in which um, that Lions team was an absolute mess. Uh, they're they had aging players. I think that was the year where it was one of Matthew Stafford's last years in Detroit. He had a old Adrian Peterson. I think he like came out of retirement or something, or AP was still wanting to play. DeAndre Swift. They were dealing with injuries. Old, kind of old players across the board. So sort of what the Eagles dealt with at one point in time. But nonetheless, he is a OC that kind of matches what the Eagles do right now in terms of offense. They're heavy 11 personnel, so that kind of transition should be a little bit easier, so they don't have to make a complete change, which a lot of people might not want to hear that. But at the same time, in terms of a transition, it makes things easy. So in those Detroit years, he was running under 11 personnel about 66% of the time. He had a percentage between shotgun and under center of like a 60-40, which is one element that a lot of us Eagles fans want to see again in terms of how our offense is formed with that kind of formation. We need to see a little bit more of under center with Jalen Hurts. I don't think we see much of that in 22, to my knowledge, although there was a lot more RPO play action involved and stuff like that. But I can see with that type of offensive structure with Darrell Bevel, why not run a few bootlegs or something with Hurts for how well he is able to move with the football in his hands? You have that dynamic to where he can take QB draws and what have you, and he's not afraid to run with it outside of this year with his knee problem and then the dislocated finger. But everything we've seen in 22, you can see that kind of a benefit when you're running plays like that, when you get under center or
Yeah.
you do bootlegs. And something like that is where I believe you can really take advantage of a lot of defenses that are in cover two, outside of cover two situations where they're dealing with single high safety and you can run two verticals on the outside. And if one guy beats his man, all for it. If you bootleg to that side of the field and just stuff like that. Um, Candidate number two is maybe also not a popular one to me, but that's Chad O'Shea. Had some time. He had plenty of time with. Let me get back to him quick here. Um, Chad is currently with the Browns. He has been with them since 2020 as the passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach. He has been most notably known to work with Tom Brady from '09 to 2018 as the wide receivers coach under Bill Belichick. He was a part of that Super Bowl winning team, Super Bowl 51, where the Atlanta Falcons blew that 28-3 lead and whatnot. Not to pack on the Falcons, but I think the biggest drawback to him is going to be how complex of an offense he wants to run or not. That was one of the biggest complaints in the 2019 year, which is the only year that he was an offensive coordinator in this league for the Miami Dolphins. It was said in reports that a lot of players just thought that it was a crap show, in him trying to install this offense, and it was too complex for some of the players and what have you. So I think his time away from that, he has gone a little better, with how he was able to make Joe Flacco relevant for at least 1 week or two before they got obliterated by the Texans. But the Erhard Perkins offense that he likes to run, the biggest thing that stands out to me is hearing that it's run heavy with a rudimentary passing game. That would be awesome for us for as many consecutive years now. And we didn't say this too often last year, but this year, everyone on Twitter, run the ball, run the ball. Why are we not running? And we're seeing DeAndre Swift having 5 carries in the first half of the Buccaneers game, and he had 10 carries that entire game. You signed this guy to be dynamic in the backfield. And when Kenny Gainwell's not working out and they're not playing Rashad Penny, and Boston Scott, the giant killer, was no killer whatsoever, we need to run the football. I think Chad O'Shea can bring that to this offense where it's in dire need of a better balance. Getting Jalen Hurts into more of a rhythm. And I think Jalen's the type of guy that, although Tom Brady was the quarterback that Chad was working with all those years under Belichick in those Patriot offenses, I think Jalen is smart enough to deal with that type of complexity. And the amount of experience that these two guys that I'm mentioning off of can have a positive dividends on, helping Sirianni out, develop some kind of game plan on a weekly basis. And there's some similar things to a West Coast style of offense, but one of the biggest things is where it says that they group pass concepts and they group routes together properly. And it was too often where we didn't see that. And you mentioned it in the beginning of this podcast, where we had 2 receivers to one side of the field and they're so darn close to each other for no reason. How many empty sets the Eagles ran in that Buccaneers game, and all Todd Bowles had to do was say, okay, rush 6, blitz the crap out of them. Every time they were in an empty set, just blitz them, and they're not going to do anything. And we didn't mention this. 0 for 9 on third down. 0 for 11 if you include fourth, because we had no answer for the blitz and not utilizing the middle of the field. The concepts were just absolute garbage. So I think along those lines, like, come on, add a little bit of flavor with this type of experience. So to me, Darrell Bevell and Chad O'Shea, I think, are pretty interesting candidates, but it's all going to depend on the amount of connection that they do or don't have with Sirianni, if he would approve of these guys to the extent of, is this the head coach making these decisions on who he wants, or is it going to be the front office and that type of management and saying, okay, well, these are the assistants that you're going to have, and see what you can do. Those we don't have the answer for, but that's, those are 2 candidates for me offensively.
It's going to be very interesting to see what the team does in the offseason, but that's about all we have time for today.
Minus the free agency. Minus free agency.
Yeah, so we'll be back probably in a couple weeks to talk about free agency and everything. But
we have to.
I want to thank Lindy. I want to thank you for all your time this season. Another season of Linc'd podcast. Really enjoy having you on the show. And want to thank everybody that has tuned in and supported us throughout this season. So
Certainly.
we I know it wasn't really the best season that we wanted, but still have fun doing the show. Still had a couple interviews. We interviewed Murney Schneider. We interviewed Merrill Reese. Had
One
some
of the
good
goats.
guests.
Yep.
Had some good guests on the show, man. So
Yeah.
tune in, guys. We'll be back a few weeks, talk about free agency and a bunch of other stuff. But until then, hope you guys take care. Stay dry, stay hydrated, stay out of the snow.
Yeah.
And we'll see
I
you
wish
guys
I
when we
could.
see you guys, okay?